So I'm going to go ahead and run this in debug mode. And again, this is where I think using this debugger and watching the values of the things in memory really help you to go, ah, yes, these actual objects are existing as these kind of groups of variables. So let's run it and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So I ran in, oh, I've got a problem here. P1 dot increase points. Oop, did I have the wrong thing here? Oh, increase total points, sorry. Maybe some of you noticed that. That should have been increased total points. So let's just copy that. I should have tried actually compiling this before I... Okay, now let's try running it. Okay, so let's run it in debug mode. Okay, so watch what happens. As usual, it's going to put the variables over here as they're created. And in this case, the variables, at least most of them, like all of them here, are going to be objects that store other variables. So if I now say step, okay, notice there's now a P1 variable right here. Okay, that's our P1 object. And you can actually click on this little whatever that is right there to open up the variable and look inside, or open up the object and look inside and see what it's storing. And notice that it has a variable called total points, and by default it's set at 0. I mentioned that in class the other day. When you haven't set the variable yet, all numeric variables just default to 0. So player 1 has a variable called total points, and right now it's set to 0. So obviously after I call set total points, that should actually set this to 1000. So I'm going to go step down, and it actually changed the value of the total points for P1 to 1000. And it did that, I didn't show you this, but it did that by actually running the code over here. It actually called set total points here, and it actually ran this method to do that. And if we wanted to, we could actually click this little button to step in and watch it go through this code, but I'm going to skip that for now just to make it a little easier to follow. Okay, so now we're going to create a P2 and set its total points. So if I step a couple more, you'll notice now there's a P2 object, and I can open that up and see that its total points is set to 500. So we've got two objects, each with their own copy of this total points variable that we defined over here as the variable that will be stored for each basketball player. So we've got two basketball players, P1, P2. Okay, so let's step back here. Whoops, go back to our program. So clearly this should be, each time we call these, it should increase their points, right? So for the first one, we're calling it on P1. So as I step through, you'll see that P1's total points went up. So I called increase total points by 25, and it went up to 1025, and you get the idea. I call it again, it goes up again. Now I'm going to call the next line P2. I'm going to increase its total points, increase its total points, so now P2 has 529. And now I just get down to the point where I'm actually printing out their total points. So this, when I say get total points on P1, it's actually going to go into the P1 object, retrieve the value of total points. So it should print out 1038. So all it's doing is getting that value of the variable from the P1 object. So if I say go down, it actually printed out player 1 has 1038, which is exactly what it has here in memory. And as I step the next one, it says player 2 has 529, which is what it has in memory. And now our program is pretty much done. So I can go ahead and click end here, or just step through to the end. Okay, so hopefully that helps a little bit to give you this sense of how this is actually storing these things in memory. And I'm going to show you one other thing related to this. So we haven't used this yet, but this is even a little nicer way to view these objects and see what's happening to them in memory. So there's another thing up here that you can run. Okay, it's right next to the debugger. And this is something where you can run in debugger mode, but also have this thing called the canvas pop up. And I'll show you what that does. So I'm going to click here to run it. Okay, I'm running debug mode. I'm still stepping down through. But I now have this canvas here. And what that allows me to do is, as variables pop up over here, or objects pop over here, I can actually drag them onto the canvas and view their internal data as the program runs. So it's a little nicer view. I'll show you what I mean. I'll just run it and you'll see what I'm talking about. So I'm going to go ahead and step down here. Okay, I've got this object called P1. I can now take this, drag it up here onto the canvas. And this is basically a view of that object. So what it shows is we've got this object called P1. I'll talk later about why there's this little arrow pointing to it. But P1 is referring to this basketball player type object. That's basically the type of the object. And then inside of that, it's got one variable is all. It's got total points, and it's set at 1000. And then as I step through the program, you can see that it will change P2. So let's drag P2 onto the canvas here. We've got another object called P2 that has a total points of 500. And as I keep going through here, you'll see that the variables are changing as I call these methods. And it's just a little kind of nicer way. Now you can see P2's variables are changing. A little nicer way to view this. Okay, than looking in this little variable viewer over here. So you can see we've got a couple objects, and you can actually look at the objects and see how things are changing as they're going. And again, this is a super simple program. In programs as we go along, we're going to have a lot more than just one simple variable for the particular object. We're going to have a player, basketball player, will have all sorts of things like a name and points and salary and all sorts of stuff that we'd want to keep track of for whatever type of program we're actually